Hi. I decided to make this video because I continue to find that a lot of the people I support in their supervision practice want help to think about how to support their supervisees who they have ethical concerns about or concerns about their competency. And whenever we have concerns about a supervisee's competence or their ethical behavior with clients, we have an ethical responsibility as their supervisors to find ways to address that effectively and in ways that don't compromise our relationship with them, because we really want to continue to have a safe relational alliance with the people we're supervising. And we don't want to confront concerns in a way that's going to alienate them, because in the end, that's going to reduce the chances that they're going to continue to be self-reflective and explore areas that they really need to continue to grow as clinicians. And so I've made a video of strategies for supportive confrontation, which addresses a lot of this. And many of you who are watching this maybe have already watched that. But this is just getting into a little bit more specific examples about kind of when concerns get serious, things we can do and say. And just to introduce this for folks who are doing the workshop on ethical concerns, ethical challenges and supervision, I decided to add this addendum to the workshop because for those of you who are watching the recording, you didn't get the benefit of some of the breakout and discussion groups that the folks who did the live video got to watch. And so I wanted to model some of the specific responses to some of the questions that came up so that folks could kind of see what it looks like, what the words are that come out of my mouth when I try to address some of these concerns and some of the ideas that maybe would be helpful with the specifics that people are dealing with. So the first idea that I wanted to remind folks about is that it's very helpful to set the stage up front, to create opportunities for supervision to be a place where we're balancing our role as a supportive advocate for the people we're supervising, for our practitioners, with our responsibility to all the stakeholders. First and foremost, the clients that they're serving. And so we have this ethical responsibility to make sure that we are thinking carefully about their impact on clients and whether there's a way that they are hurting clients or could be more effective. And so that's part of our responsibility. We're holding these kind of dual roles, and it's very helpful if we talk a little bit about that up front. Not only are we responsible in our supervisory roles and relationships to our supervisee, but to the client and to the licensing board and to these various other parties who are interested in making sure that we're using supervision to address the things that need to be addressed. So up front in an early supervision meeting, here's what some of the things I might say just to model what that would look like. So, first and foremost, I'm going to be saying things like, I'm so glad that we're getting to do supervision together. This is a role that I really value, and it's important to me that our supervision together is meaningful and beneficial to you in your work and gives you support in growing in the ways that you want to grow, but also helps you to be a better clinician. And I'm very aware that my responsibility is to be your advocate and support person, but also to think carefully about ways to increase your effectiveness with clients and to assure that you aren't making any mistakes with clients that could be harmful. And I want you to know that my goal is not to create an experience where you feel like you're getting monitored and scrutinized in a way that increases your anxiety, but to know that I'm wanting to help you hold this responsibility with support so that we are both thinking carefully about clients as these vulnerable people who really need our thoughtfulness in making sure that we're keeping them safe and meeting their needs and not hurting them in any way. I'm also wanting to say up front in supervision that I want to make sure that we're clear about what my role is and what their role is with clients, and talking a little bit about some of the common ethical concerns that can come up around protecting confidentiality in clients dealing with some of the conflicts of ethical responsibilities to keep clients safe and duty to report versus honor confidentiality, and how supporting supervisees to address that. And just being clear about the role of a clinician to really be thinking first and foremost about the client's needs, and not to have dual relationships or kind of dual investment that would cause them to not be thinking carefully about their clients, and rather to exploit them or to have other motivations than to serve the client. And so I'm going to want to talk a little bit about some of the common ethics. It's really helpful to pull up the code of ethics and to say, these are some things that our responsibility for clients includes. And I want to just make sure that you understand what these ethical principles are, and that if you have confusion about them, we can talk about it. The other thing I want to talk about up front with clients in initial sessions is just that how I handle evaluation, and that part of my responsibility, if they're getting their supervision for licensure, is to do these 6-month evaluations in which I'm letting the board know if there's any concerns. And so I want my supervisees to know up front that I'm not going to keep secrets from them about concerns I have, and that if there are concerns, I'm not going to wait until the 6-month evaluation to list them or send them to the board, but rather we will be talking about them up front. And the way that I will talk about them up front is that as soon as I see something that concerns me, I'll bring it up. And more often, what happens with people is that it's not actually like a concern in the sense of capital C concern, but it's more just like, oh, here's something that might make you more effective in this situation, or here's something I'm wondering if you might have missed, or here's something to think about that might improve your responsiveness to client needs, or your kind of sensitivity to cultural issues or to trauma issues. And so I'm going to be raising those as they come up, and we're going to just be thinking together about how to increase your effectiveness and your sensitivity to clients. And mostly that's not going to be anything heavy or serious. If it is something serious, I will say this is the kind of concern that if it doesn't get addressed, I would feel like I need to let the board know about, or I might need to talk with someone from your agency, or we need to have some kind of corrective action plan around. And so I'm going to let them know if this is just not just their growing edge or a place to consider enhancing their practice, but is more of that capital C concern. And in which case we will talk very specifically about what the plan is for addressing it. And probably if I don't see responsiveness on their part, those are the times when I'd be likely to let the board know that I have this concern and I'm not seeing growth around it, or that the client doesn't seem to be able to, or my supervisees lacking awareness about it. So those are some of the things I'm going to want to talk about up front. And I guess the exception to them always hearing about things first before the board would be a really big transgression, like if a supervisee had sex with a client or did something very harmful to a client, that I might immediately feel the need to go to their administrative supervisor and to the board with what happened. But I haven't ever had that happen in 30 years of supervising. And so I think that more often the case is that these are concerns that we just want to talk to our supervisees about, and that they're interested in growing. And if we can do it in a way that balances this message of we're their allies and we appreciate their strengths and we want to support them, but that we also are taking these things seriously, that people are very motivated to continue to grow and become more self-aware and more rigorous in what they're doing. So having said those things about some of the things that we can do up front, a couple other things I like to add in my first session with people is that I do need them to be the ones who bring representative cases and concerning cases to our supervision, and that the vast majority of our supervision focus is based on what they bring to supervision. And so I depend on them to bring cases of concern or things that they're feeling confused about, or places where they want support to clarify their role or to be more effective. And that if they're not doing that, I'm kind of in the dark about how to help them in ways that they really need and deserve help. And so that kind of capacity to talk about mistakes and struggles and bring those forward is something I really depend on from them. And I want to let them know that up front. And I also want to let them know that I am not going to see that as a problem area. If they talk about those things, I'm actually going to see it as a strength. And if they're not talking about those things, if all they're talking about is how wonderful everything's going and there are no concerns, then that's when I start feeling a sense of concern actually rising up in me. So I want to let people know that up front so that they recognize that that's something that I'm looking for. And it's not just a matter, as those of you who've watched some of my workshops on this topic, or it's not just a matter of telling them that's what I expect, but I want to model that by being open about my own mistakes and struggles, and kind of modeling that this is something that is normal and natural and good to talk about. And it's how we grow and be more effective and more rigorous as clinicians. So I'm just looking to see if there's anything else that I'd like to talk about up front. I think those are the main things that I really want them to be self-reflective and how I'm going to handle evaluation and such. And so I want to go to some specific questions that came up during the workshop or outside the workshop from people I supervise who are doing supervision of folks. And so I'm just going to go down the line. So one is a supervisee who doesn't share their mistakes and kind of just describes things as going well all the time. And when they talk about specific cases, they don't seem very self-reflective. They just seem interested in presenting themselves as someone who kind of knows what's going on, or just doesn't have any questions. And so in that case, what I might say to the supervisee is something like the following. I'll just call them Mary. So Mary, I wanted to talk with you today about some thoughts I've been having about how our conversations in supervision have been going. And one of the things that I've been noticing is that you seem really focused on sharing with me some of the ways that things are going well in your work. And I actually see that as a strength. I think it's really important for practitioners to have a sense of what's working and to be able to kind of embody a sense of confidence about that. And so I think that that's a great thing, and I wouldn't want to take that away from you, but I feel like there's another piece of it that's missing with you, to be honest. And I think part of it is that as a practitioner who's been doing this work for over 30 years, I have lots of stuff that shows up almost every day when I work with clients where I'm feeling unsure about what I could have done that might have been more effective, or places I might have misstepped. And the fact that I'm not hearing anything like that from you concerns me, because it makes me feel like either you're aware of mistakes or struggles and you don't feel safe to talk about them with me, or you aren't noticing those kinds of things as they're happening. Because what I can't believe is that there just never are any struggles, because I just have never seen that in all of the people that I work with and admire as seasoned practitioners, and in myself. And so I just want to bring up that I'm a little bit worried that you're not being open about the things that are hard for you. And I want to understand better, what might be causing you to have trouble being open about it, because I think our work together is going to be much more impactful. And I'm going to be better able to make sure that the clients you're serving are being well tended to, if you're able to talk about some of the questions and struggles. So that would be an example of what I might say to them. The other thing I might do is, before I even said those things, I might think about what is it that's making them feel unsafe or making them feel closed down, and can I address that just by changing my behavior? Sometimes just talking with folks about the developmental process of a clinician moving from focusing more on what's wrong with the client to beginning to get more comfortable looking at, what did I miss? What am I not doing? What could I do better? What's getting in my way? And that's something that shows up more and more as clinicians develop confidence. And so it could be that if the clinician who's hesitant to share mistakes hears that actually it shows that they're a more seasoned clinician, they might feel safer to begin to share mistakes. The other thing I might do is just model more kind of preemptively about struggles, so that when they start describing a case, even before they talk about how successful they were, I might say, wow, as you're describing this, it reminds me of a case like that I worked with. And I remember I really struggled, or I took some missteps in this way or that way. And so just sharing that kind of thing can be a way of opening the door for them to be a little more self-reflective. The next question I have is about a supervisee who appears kind of cut off from their emotions, or even has said something like, I like to kind of set my emotions aside, or put a wall between myself and my emotions when I'm working with clients, so that they don't get in my way. And maybe I've experienced that person as seeming a little bit cold or unresponsive emotionally. And so I guess the way I might bring it up is just, I think sometimes we have to decide whether we bring something up as a concern, or whether we just kind of fold it in a way that's a little bit outside of the realm of concern, maybe even as a strength, in response to a strength. So one way I might bring something like that up is if at some point they say something that has a little bit of emotion to it, or they talk about their connection to a client's emotions. I might say something like, oh, I really liked hearing the way you just described the fact that she looked so sad. And I noticed that when you said that, I could feel in your voice the intensity of that sadness. And I just want to compliment you on the fact that you were able to connect that way with her sadness, because, and then it might use that as a reason, a moment to describe why that's important, why our capacity for empathic connection with clients is important, and that one of the variables, the common factors for successful treatment that's been identified in lots and lots of research, is this sense that the client feels deeply understood and connected to the therapist in that emotionally empathic way. And so it might be that I wait till I see it happening a little bit, I compliment it, and then I talk about how that seems really important, and I'm wondering how they accessed it in that moment, because sometimes it's hard to access. And so it could be that I'm just kind of trying to build on it through going in a moment of strength. I also might bring it up in more of a generic way, kind of like, one of the things that we all struggle with is, how do we hold our emotions in a way where we can be really present and emotionally available to clients, but that we don't get overwhelmed by them. And I might just talk about that more theoretically, and then ask them kind of where they feel like they're finding that balance, and that kind of supporting them to kind of develop skills for kind of moving toward emotion without being dysregulated by it. So that would be another way. But if I felt like maybe those ways weren't working, or a more direct way was called for, I would just bring it up as a concern. And many of you have heard me talk before about, sometimes when I have a concern that I want to bring up in supervision, I help myself stay accountable to that by mentioning it at the very beginning, or even sending an email where I say, in our next supervision session, there's something I was thinking about from our last session that I want to make sure and follow up on. Is it okay if we start our session with that? So that I'm kind of bookmarking that we're going to get to that. But also just saying at the beginning, like, what would you like to make sure we talk about today? And here's something I'd like to make sure we talk about. So then I might just say, I've been noticing, or you've even shared that you're using this strategy of trying to set your emotions aside when you're with clients. And I can really see why you're doing that. It makes sense that you don't want to get derailed by your emotions, or that you're aware that there's lots of landmines and triggers that you can fall into if your emotions are too kind of up during a session. And so it makes sense to me that you're finding ways to not let yourself get derailed or hijacked by emotions during a session. But what I'm noticing is that you're kind of needing to go to an extreme in order to do that, that I think is interfering with your emotional presence with clients. And that we have to kind of, I want to support you to find ways to be emotionally available, to be someone who the client feels felt by. That's a, I forget who used that term first, but that the client needs a felt sense that my therapist really feels what it's like for me. And that's that we don't, it's not really easy to fake that. That's something that people pick up on in this very kind of neuroceptive way, where there's a lot of subtleties to it, but they can see in our facial expressions and our voice tone that we are feeling for them, feeling with them, and but not overwhelmed by the feelings. And so I think just I would want to share with my supervisee a little bit about why that's important and how I've navigated it, what I do when I start noticing that an emotion is feeling too big. In one of the differences that can be helpful to talk with supervisees about is between that kind of mirror neuron part of empathy, where we're feeling the client's pain in a way where actually the pain centers in our brain are lighting up, versus more of a state of compassion, where we're caring about our clients' emotions and we're feeling sensitive to them, but we're not actually feeling their emotions. And so that's a fine line, but I think we want to help people begin to think about, what does it look like, or what does it feel like when I know that someone really feels me, feels with me, but isn't overwhelmed by my emotions, or isn't kind of taking those emotions and letting them push buttons for themselves of whole landmines full of, explosive emotions that they have from other similar issues in the past. Another way that I might talk about that with my supervisees would be just to talk about how one of the things that I try to do in my supervision is to be very emotionally connected with my supervisee, and that when they're going through stress or really struggling with a client or feeling frustrated with a client, I want them to feel like I get that, and that I can kind of access an emotion about that. Like I can remember a client that really irritated me or scared me or confused me, and that my face and my mannerisms and my words can indicate that I'm with them emotionally as they're describing an emotional experience. And so I can maybe harken back to ways that I've been doing that in supervision, and that person can relate to it that way. So those are some of the things I might do. I'm going to talk a little bit about ways we can also help people reflect on their own family background around things. So emotions is a big one. Like many of us grew up in families where we learned that emotions weren't safe. If you grew up in an alcoholic family environment where there was a lot of volatility around certain emotions, you learned it's not safe to feel things, or it's certainly to express those feelings. And so it might be helpful for the supervisee to notice if that's, a conflict avoidance or an emotion avoidance that comes from their family background, that they would be interested in understanding better by talking with you about it briefly. Obviously, supervision is not the same as therapy, and I've talked about that in other places, but we need to be willing to kind of explore a person's personal reactions and personal feelings that come up in the work, as long as it relates to the work and the ways that they can be better at their work. and that sometimes just identifying that there's family background issues that are coming up in the work or kind of constraining them in their work can be very helpful. And it might be just naming those and understanding those and kind of deciding to set those aside or move on from those old family legacies is all they need from the supervision. Or it might be that you discover that there's some really tangled up family narratives and family dynamics that they want to understand more fully, and that would deserve a more a therapeutic relationship where they would actually set up their own therapy outside of supervision for that. Another question that came up was with a supervisee who was kind of a one-trick pony, that they always went to the same model and the same intervention, no matter what the client presented. And so that would just be something I would probably just mention as something I've noticed, and it might show up if they're presenting a case and talking about maybe the success they had or the struggle they had. I might say, probably starting with strengths, like, it sounds like you're feeling really well versed in this, using I don't know what, some kind of cognitive tool or something, and that you've been finding that that's really valuable with your clients, and I see you using that a lot. And I'm wondering in this case whether you have thoughts about other things that might have been helpful, or whether you feel like that was the best tool for this situation. Or I might just say, I'm noticing that my go-to in that situation might have been different. Let's just talk about what the different options are that come from different models. And so that if your model is focusing on behaviors, it might be good to also know about things that focus on emotions or on beliefs, and that we can approach the client struggles from different angles. And part of that is noticing what the client responds well to, and part of it is what we're comfortable with. But that one of the things that we know from research is that it's our ability to develop a unique response that fits for this particular client that makes us especially effective with clients. And so we don't want to always be doing the same thing. And I've been noticing that you have this one thing that you do really well, and you tend to use it first and foremost with clients. And I think sometimes it's a great fit, but I think other times I'd love to make sure that you have a toolbox full of other things that you feel comfortable in doing. So let's keep exploring what else we can add. So that might be a way I would talk about that. The next one that I wrote down was a client who, this is more in the context of groups, that in group supervision, one of the supervisees was giving advice to other members in a way that seemed a little bit all-knowing and kind of judgmental, and made it unsafe for people to have struggles, and that there was this sense one day that particular supervisee wasn't at group, that people went much deeper into being self-reflective. And so this practitioner that I was working with, who was the supervisor, the group supervisor, was noticing that people were very constrained because of the way the supervisee was coming across as a little bit arrogant or judgmental. And so that's a really tricky one to address in group settings. And I think I would really, with any concern that comes up in group, I want to be careful about not bringing it up in a way that would be shaming or make a group member feel targeted or unsafe. And so in many cases, I might check in with the supervisee about, I have something I want to talk with you about that's been showing up in group that I'd like to talk with you outside of group about. So can we set up a phone call or a video conference or a session where we just talk a little bit about how the group supervision is going? Sometimes I can bring it up in other ways that are a little bit, that would still be safe for that supervisee. So one way is to reiterate some of our expectations that we have in group. Like at the beginning of group session, I might just say, I'm aware that, we've had new members join our group, or it's been a long time since our initial meetings, and I want to just mention again some of my expectations about group. And that can be things as simple as just that it means a lot to everyone in the group to have people's attention in a way that's, kind of part of being a responsive community for each other and a supportive community for each other. And part of what that means is that I would expect, like if we're doing our meetings through video conferencing, I would expect that people aren't, reading emails on a separate screen, or, responding to texts or kind of focusing on something other than the person who's presenting or talking. And that if they have to do something else, like maybe they have a sick child who came into the room, or a client that's having an emergency that they need to respond to, that they don't try to kind of do that on the slide, but they just write into the chat or let people know, sorry, I have to step out for a second, or I'm listening, but I'm helping my daughter get set up on a video because she's homesick from school, or whatever it is. And so just to keep us in the loop with an awareness that we're all actually more, we can feel it when people's eyes aren't really on us, or that they really aren't participating actively in the group. And so I might just say that to everyone. I might mention to everyone that it's very helpful to make sure that when we're presenting cases that we're clear about what it is we're wanting from the group, and that then group members are listening to that and not offering things that are different than what people are wanting, because sometimes the person wants, how do I get this father to be more engaged in treatment? But maybe you heard something mentioned about the child in the family, and you want to talk about ways to work more effectively with the child, but that's not what the presenter has asked for. And so that we just want to listen carefully and make sure before we start making suggestions that it fits. And sometimes it's helpful just to check, would it be helpful for me to talk about ways I might work with this child around their inappropriate touching of their sibling, or some whatever the topic is. And so just making sure that we're checking in. And then I might also just invite group members to try to be direct with each other about that if they're feeling like they are getting feedback that they're not actually wanting, that they just say, you know what, I'm noticing that we're talking a lot about what to do with little Joey, and I'm actually wanting help to think about how to engage mom more. So to try to be clear about what they're wanting from the group. So those would be things I might talk about in a generic sense. But I think unless I can share the concern in a way that is safe for everybody, I'm much more likely to try to bring it up outside of group. Another way I might do it with group members is just to myself, just check in, to say, oh, I'm noticing as you're sharing that, I'm really wanting it to be safe for you to self-reflect about what was hard or what was your struggle. And I just want to remind everyone in here that when people are self-reflecting about their struggles, the most important thing is for them to feel validation and empathy from others in the group, and not necessarily for people to see it as a chance to try to school them in what they should do next time or how to deal with it more effectively. And so I might just, again, try to kind of preemptively talk about things that folks could do that would kind of be the opposite of giving advice or being judgmental. Another question was about supervisees who seem to not be clear about their therapeutic role and are kind of straying into being more like a friend to their client and not a therapist or a practitioner. And I think I would just deal with that by bringing it up in a very kind of validating way of emphasizing, well, here, I'll just pretend like I'm talking to the supervisee. So I'll call the person Mary again. So Mary, one of the things I'm thinking about as you're talking about this case is how tricky it is for us to figure out how to be clear about what our role is and what it isn't when we're working with youth like your client that you're describing, who are so vulnerable and are so hungry to have a supportive ally in their life, and would love nothing more than being able to have us be their best friend, or to take them home with us to stay at our house, or whatever that is. And so I'm noticing that as you're talking about your client, Lydia, that some of the things you're describing feel like they fit a little more with being her good friend, or even being her foster mom or something. And I'm just feeling like it could be a little confusing for her, because some of those roles you can't sustain. It could also be overwhelming for you if you take on implying that you're going to kind of be there to celebrate her birthday with her, or pick her up if her car breaks down, or help her, you know, move in or out of her apartment, or those kinds of things. And as I'm saying this, I'm stepping out of the role play for a second, I'm realizing that, you know, a lot of it does depend on the agency that we're in, because some agencies, our role is to be more of a mentor, and that we really are actually helping people, you know, move into an apartment, or, giving them a ride home from school, or taking them to their family visits, you know, and debriefing with them in the car on the way to and from. And so if that's part of our role, that's one thing. It's kind of defined by the agency. But if our role is to be more of a therapist who meets with them for 1 hour a week in our clinic, we have to be a little bit careful about what else we kind of step into or out of, especially if it's not going to be sustainable, or it's going to be confusing for the client. And so going back to talking to Mary, I might just say, I really appreciate the ways that you're wanting Lydia to know that you care about her, and that your caring is sincere, and that she can enjoy things with you, and that you guys can do fun things together during your sessions. But I want to kind of just put out a word of caution about straying into too much of a friendship role, because that's something that we can't really sustain. And it also is something that can be confusing for clients, because they can then think that we're going to follow through and show up in their lives in ongoing ways, and that treatment isn't going to end just because we leave the job, or, you know, the length of services has been, you know, limited by our agency or something, that they would think, well, then just come and visit me anyway. And it would be very confusing for them that you're not doing that. And so I would want you to have strategies for kind of letting her know sometimes that it makes sense that she wants that from you, but that's not something that you can do in your role as a therapist. And that you want to make sure that she understands that you're there to think really carefully about her, and to support her in her life during that hour that you have together, and also for some emergency calls if that's part of it. But that what you're not going to be able to do is set up, you know, fun activities on the side that you do after that time together. And the reason for that is that what the agency has hired you to do is within a certain constraint, but also that you, in your work, you have a certain number of cases, and that you need to spend an average of an hour a week with them, and that those kinds of activities don't fit into that. But also that the difference between you and a friend is that you want to show up for the person and put your own stuff aside, because kind of the golden rule when we're doing this work as therapists is to think carefully about our clients and not be thinking about our own needs. Whereas with friends, we kind of, it's more of a mutual reciprocal thing. And what we want our clients to understand is that we can really care about them and have sincere interest in their lives without it being this reciprocal relationship where we want them to care about us and have investment in our lives. And so that it is more of a relationship where we're there to serve them, and not that they're there to serve us, and not that we're just buddies. And so we're trying to think about them really carefully, because we feel like it's our role to help them flourish in their lives, and not so much to get our own needs met. And so just to help one of the things, Mary, that I would like you to be able to do with Lydia is to help her understand the difference between those roles, and that she could trust that you still do really care about her sincerely and want her to have fun and enjoy herself, and that you will sometimes be able to have fun and enjoy her, but within the constraints of this role. There's so much more about that kind of dynamic that's tricky. And I think part of it is really helping the people that we supervise feel like their care and their compassion and their devotion to their clients can come through within their role. And it doesn't need to be that they step beyond their role and start doing extra stuff outside of the therapy. And that's tricky, but it's something to explore, because sometimes I think our guilt around the limitations cause us to stray beyond things that we can sustain, and it ends up being confusing for clients, because they then start thinking that we're going to act like their friend, and then when we start setting limits on that, they feel betrayed. So we just don't want to set that kind of situation up. The other thing that I had was people who have supervisees who are uncomfortable with certain populations, like maybe uncomfortable working with men, that they've worked a lot with women who are survivors of domestic violence, and that they are especially not, feeling, kind of a little bit burned on the ways that men have often hurt women in the wide world. And that's hard for them to set that aside and really see men as people who need and deserve our support. It could be that they have trouble working with someone who's transgender because of maybe their own religious beliefs or values, or that they have trouble working with parents because as a child they really needed to get away from their parents because their parents were hurtful and there were certain toxic dynamics going on, and that they find themselves wanting to help all their clients get away from their parents, even though that's not always the best way to serve them. And so in all of those cases, I think we need to be willing to talk with our supervisees about the ways that they are a little bit blocked from showing up empathically, and that we're noticing this, that we're noticing some judgment or some sense that these people are not quite as near and dear to them as some other people that they're working with, and that we've just noticed this and we want to explore it with them because we're guessing it's going to get in the way of them being able to be effective. Sometimes it means that as supervisors, we need to advise the practitioners we're working with not to work with certain types of clients until they've gotten more supervision around this or done their own personal work around it. But that's not always an option. Sometimes they're working in agencies where that's the caseload is just kind of flowing towards them, and that they therefore need to take responsibility to examine their own blocks and be working through those. And obviously, or maybe not so obviously, I should mention that if someone is not able to kind of put those blocks aside or develop more self-awareness around them and kind of open up their capacity to connect with all clients from different walks of life, then we do need to name that and talk with them about how that could be harming clients and that they can't be practicing when that's happening. More often it's just kind of this soft level of them being less effective because of some of these judgments and blocks. And it can be helpful to explore those with people. And one of the ways that I have encouraged people to explore it is to use this self of the worker questionnaire that I developed a long time ago. Let me just pull it up. I'm going to share my screen and pull it up and talk about ways that you might go through it with your supervisees, or you might have them. Probably a good way to start is to have them go through it and then bring it into the next supervision session with some of their thoughts or their answers to some of the questions on it. So I'm just going to share screen and pull this up. And this, again, my apologies, it's kind of an old form, but it just talks a little bit about how it can be so helpful for people to have some self-awareness about the types of clients that they're very comfortable with or that they struggle with. And so the first set of questions here are questions about supervisees paying attention to what comes up for them in their work. And I've framed this, I developed it when I was supervising a bunch of family therapists. And so it's more about families, but I think more often now people are supervising people across more individual work or a variety of work. And so the first question, what gets hard for me in working with, and I might just say clients, but I think I'm talking about is there certain types of clients or types of situations that are difficult. And sometimes it helps to think about, when do I find myself feeling anxious or stuck or powerless or stupid, that there might be certain types of clients that just intimidate us, or that we feel hopeless about, or that we don't feel like we're able to engage, create a relational alliance with. And it's so helpful for people to begin to see patterns like, oh yeah, that always happens to me when I'm working with the fathers and not with the mothers, or when I'm working with people who are different, from a different ethnic background than mine or something. How do I react with certain types of things, like clients who get angry, or when there's conflict in the room, or when there's silence? I just find it's very interesting when I work with practitioners that some people have a horrible, horrible time when clients are not very expressive. They're kind of inhibited about talking, versus others have a really horrible time when clients have antagonistic messages that they're giving to the therapist, or are conflictual in the ways that they interact. And so it can be really helpful for the practitioner to notice when they get triggered. I get triggered by anger, or I get triggered by conflict. And then, kind of just along those lines, what kinds of problems do they find the most challenging? And getting specific, is it easier for them to work with adult women or men or elders or young people, or children or teens and girls or boys, and transgender or queer, or, kind of just what are they noticing? Who are the people that are difficult for them to join with or comfortable? A lot of people who have worked a lot with children, when they get in the room with adults, feel very intimidated, because they feel all of a sudden like they're working with someone who's more capable of judging them or sizing them up in a way that's hard. And the flip of that is that many people who are very comfortable with adults feel clueless or a little bit overwhelmed by some of the behavior management and the, kind of need for connecting in a more playful way with young people. Do they notice that there's roles that they inadvertently slip into, like rescuer or protector or fixer or judge? I know when I'm nervous, I slip into kind of a psychoeducational mode because of all the work I do around teaching and training. It's really easy for me to start sliding into, especially when I'm working with parents around things that they could do to be more effective with their children, to slide away from supporting them to unpack their emotional blocks and more into just being a source of information about what children need. And that's not necessarily at all what they need. They don't need a teacher. Sometimes they do, but our ability to kind of move around within these roles is really important. Are there certain issues that are kind of toxic for us? Like I've had people I supervise who have a lot of trouble dealing with clients who are feeling very low or lost or despairing, and others who get, very triggered by clients who are a little out of control with their behaviors or their addictions. So understanding ourselves around that. Do I find certain characteristics or behaviors repelling or unsettling? You sometimes see this show up as extreme judgment about, a client being manipulative or withdrawing. And I think it's very helpful to help clinicians to recognize the ways that they might actually be, their judgments may be interfering in their ability to really show up. So if a youth they're working with is engaging in behaviors that the clinician is experiencing as manipulative, they might be, confronting that person or holding back on allowing that person to impact their behavior or get something different out of them, when in fact this person might be engaging in manipulative behavior because they don't know how to directly ask for what they need. and they're trying to impact the clinician in a way that they really need the clinician to hear and understand. And so we want to understand, we want to help the person notice if they're getting triggered by certain types of behaviors that are causing them to have a reaction that's opposite of what the client needs. So often we tend to react in ways that replicate dynamics that this client has already experienced. So a manipulative client maybe has experienced a lot of being invalidated about their needs. And so they've escalated their attempts to get their needs met because of that, and that they actually need more validation. A client that's causing boredom in us because they're kind of maybe endlessly talking in a monotone, and they're not really giving us room to be involved in the session, maybe has experienced people shutting them out or not being interested, and it's causing them to kind of use a defensive strategy of not even checking if we're hearing, or not even tapping into more emotional ways of expressing what's going on for them. And so they need us to kind of help them get past that monotone, or that kind of monologue way of talking. And in order to do that, we have to look at our boredom and not just settle for it and blame it on the client, but to think, what is this telling me about what I need to do differently? So just noticing how do they handle it when clients have intense feelings. Some clinicians try to just shut down the whole session because the intense feelings overwhelm them, as opposed to inviting and supporting the client to process those intense feelings in a way that help them not be overwhelmed by them, and not kind of be hijacked by them. And I wrote this in because I did this handout so long ago. I mean, it was over 20 years ago when I first created it, that I didn't include something that I always would include now, which is just what kinds of issues of diversity or difference might trigger the clinician. So just noticing, I really have trouble working with people that are a lot younger than me, or older than me, or people who are, kind of have a different religious sensitivity, or, ethnicity, or appearance, or class. Anyway, all of those issues, so important to explore. And so as you're kind of looking at what types of clients are causing reactions in the clinician and helping them to look at that, you then can go into helping them explore how this relates to, kind of what values and messages they got growing up in their families and in the cultures that they grew up in. And this is where a genogram can be very helpful to kind of have them look at their own family of origin, and what was their position in the family, what was their role in the family, like, were they the family hero, or the family clown, or the lost child, or the acting out, the scapegoat in their family. Did they feel like they were responsible for their parents' emotions? Were they kind of rescuing, or how were things managed, like anxiety managed in their family? So some families manage anxiety by kind of triangulating, or by distancing, or by having conflict, or by avoidance. And so we learn those things growing up, and then it's really easy to replicate them with our clients. And so we want to understand that. How were feelings handled in our family? What was our role in the family? How were we kind of overly dependent or overly cut off? And kind of this, how do those unresolved issues show up in our work? And so this can be a whole really juicy area to explore with our supervisees about what is it that they bring to their work from their family of origin. Sometimes it's values about, like, what, how important education is, or how important obedience is, or how important it is to talk about emotions or avoid emotions, or take the high road, or whatever it is. And so we can have these values that we haven't really ever examined, but that we're imposing them on our clients. And sometimes our values are very different than our clients. So I might have a value about relationships needing to be reciprocal and mutually respectful, that is very different than the value that a couple who's coming to see me has when they're coming from a very traditional um, Christian idea that women should be subservient or serving of men, and then I have to kind of navigate, how do I not um, impose my value system on them, but also, and how do I understand their value system? But that doesn't necessarily mean that whatever they value is sacred and I'm going to just accept it no matter what, because families sometimes value, you know, harsh physical discipline that is hurtful to children, or value repressive dynamics that are hurtful to women, and that I'm going to want to be able to both um, recognize and validate their values and what's important about them, but also bring up ways, you know, kind of in a sensitive way, that those values could be hurtful to some people, and not really serving everyone in the family, and maybe areas where they would like to kind of figure out their own way of updating or adjusting those values to feel more consistent with what they want for their particular relationship. So anyway, this whole handout is something that you can give to clients and have them fill out on their own. And you don't need to use this handout. You could make up your own. That's just like maybe 4 questions about what they could reflect on about their work, and what it brings up for them personally, and where they get stuck and triggered personally. And then they can bring that back. That can be a great topic for people to use group supervision on, because we all benefit so much from the vicarious learning we do. But it needs to be a safe group where people can say, I notice that it's really hard for me working with Black clients because I feel so guilty about the ways that I belong to a white community that has been so oppressive and racist against them. And it's hard for me to feel confident when I'm working with them because I feel so guilty about that. Or, you know, that they might need to be able to talk about things that feel a little bit dangerous or could cause judgment from other people. And so how can we make it really safe for folks to be self-exploratory and self-reflective? I'm going to stop my screen share and just say a few more things about that, because I think, you know, what we're talking about so much in our supervision is that we want to make it really safe for clinicians to look at where they're struggling, what's getting in the way for them personally, and what kind of emotions or values or reflexes are coming up in the work that might be making them less than completely effective or might make them insensitive. And this is our responsibility as supervisors, is to create that kind of environment. And so much of it is about positioning ourselves as people who are really supportive and champion their successes and their strengths, and can be validating of their intentions, even though we at the same time are saying, here's something that I think you could look at, or here's something that maybe would make you more effective with this population, or here's a blind spot I'm wondering if, or here's something that I think might be a blind spot, and I'd love us to talk about it, while at the same time we're normalizing that we all have blind spots. So I just want to wish you the best of luck in handling these really difficult situations. And one thing I might just encourage you to do is that when you're finding yourself feeling a little bit stuck in your role as a supervisor, around how to deal with a practitioner that you're supervising who is just kind of seeming a little bit confused, or a little bit off, or a little bit unclear about the way they're working with clients, or a little bit limited in ways that's really not serving clients or hurting clients. Consult with your colleagues, consult with your own supervisor, consult with people you really respect, who can help you try to clarify what your concern is, so that you can then bring it to your supervisee as soon as possible, and in as healthy and sensitive a way as possible, so that we can really honor our role as helping our clinicians to flourish and to be as effective as they possibly can, and to grow as professionals, and at the same time protecting clients in ways that are just really important. All right, take care and good luck.